design principles. So this is a picture which is in the manuscript, is also in the published paper in Journal of Product Innovation Management. As you see, for example, here the practices that we identified. You see here the underlying theories, so generative mechanisms in terms of opportunity identification, also knowledge creation and knowledge exchange in terms of knowledge theories, and that leads to one particular design principle. I'm not going to content-wise talk about those design principles because that may not interest you very much, but you see also, roughly speaking, the K-mode structure that I referred to earlier. So this is the complete set of design principles that we came up with in this particular study. After we did this, we did similar studies in University of Wageningen and in Technical University of Catalonia in Barcelona. Whereas in order to build a more broader science-based, but also practice-based for this set of design principles. So what this study does is to illustrate the interaction between emergent and delivered design processes. I haven't talked about that in detail, but the process already, once we came on board as a research team, there already was a 2-year process ongoing in terms of university process creation, which puts you in the situation of what Carl Weick calls throwness. You are thrown into a existing network and ongoing process of trying to create a particular artifact, in this particular case creating an infrastructure for university spin-off creation. So the process was, we chose to develop these design principles, both practice-based and science-based, in order to emphasize the interaction between the emergent and deliberate nature of the design process, which also makes guaranteed that we had a full connection to the practitioners in this particular area in our own university. And also shows the process of contextualization and decontextualization that I talked about in terms of adapting the process of creating an incubator in this particular university to the context of that university, but also decontextualize things by abstracting solutions and the underlying principles. So that's the university spin-off example, knowledge management, how I'm doing on time, Pierre-Jean? Good? Okay. The last example, knowledge management, probably comes a bit more close to the examples that Robert gave. It's a study I was not involved in initially. It is a PhD done at Sophia Antipolis in the south of France. They hooked up with me at a later stage to get it published in an international journal, so I co-authored the paper, I cannot be, so to speak, I'm not the intellectual origin of this particular study. What this study is about is to build a knowledge management platform in a cluster of IT firms, a large cluster of IT firms in the niche area, the Sophia Antipolis area. It's an important and challenging area of research because it's one of the areas where Europe is trying to make a huge step forward, which is building innovation regions throughout Europe, partly also with lots of European money. There are lots of failures in that particular area and only a few successes. One of the key challenges in kind of a cluster of proximate firms in such a particular region is try to really get that knowledge exchange and knowledge sharing working. Because in an open innovation setting, that's what in the end legitimizes that you are hooked up together in a particular area. So what we try to do here is, from a design science perspective, to develop design principles for developing a knowledge management platform that basically would be able to connect different firms and their researchers, their knowledge workers, and do this in a way that where users are heavily involved. User involvement that Robert also talked about. We phrase it in our particular article as human-centered design, complementary to science-based design. So the key question here is to develop a design research methodology that combines these two design perspectives in the context of a knowledge management platform. What we did in this particular study is also frame it as a co-producing, co-creation project where practitioners and researchers are working together. My French co-authors particularly also like to talk about the notion of arbitrage, which is at the heart of these co-production processes, the ongoing discourse between practitioners and researchers, but also researchers in between themselves. That process, of course, is very iterative in nature. It involves numerous loops of getting from the initial problem to the ultimate solution. The intended outcome here is to converge towards a robust solution, also rooted in an IT artifact that is embraced by a large group of users. This is one of the pictures in the article which shows these iterative loops in a designer context as well as in a user context. These two, of course, highly interrelate. Going from creating problem awareness, developing design propositions, creating scenarios of use, designing and developing artifacts, experimentation with prototypes, and the last point 6 is organizational transformation. Organizational transformation, which is not on the slide here. Sorry, here. Right. So those 6 steps essentially are repeatedly taken. This is the slide in the paper that illustrates the overall process and how we got from the initial problem and problem awareness to the ultimate artifact that was tested in 3 different prototypes, rounds of prototypes, which ultimately converged in one final solution. Most of my work has been in the area of design principles because that is the notion that is mostly lacking in my community of scholars that is heavily social science oriented, as already talked about. So this paper is also primarily about design principles and how they evolve in this particular project. You see here one of the more generic design proposition in this particular paper, also spelled out in terms of context, action, outcome, and generative mechanisms. Generative mechanisms here are knowledge generative mechanisms, opportunity creation, enhancing motivation of users, allowing for anticipation ability, and so allowing for users to anticipate what other people in that particular network can do for you, and cumulative capability. The cumulative capability was assessed by us as falling outside the scope of this particular project. It's more in the area of what industry has to do itself. So we covered the first 3 generative mechanisms, and these This more broader design principle was then also developed into three more specific design principles that spell out in more detail how you exploit that one specific generative mechanism. In this particular case, for example, opportunity. It shows also how these design principles always come as a set of coherent principles that actually talk to each other, so to speak, and interrelate to each other. So this project was successful in building an interactive map of competences, which was the primary issue in the knowledge management platform that was developed within this particular cluster in Sofia Antipolis. We didn't collect any data on knowledge creation and knowledge exchange itself, which was the intended outcome. That's what a social science researcher probably has to do to collect, for example, survey-based data throughout this cluster in order to see how these knowledge exchange processes actually evolve and what role the knowledge platform plays in it. So our user information basically is similar to what Robert talked about. We just ask users whether they use it and whether they're happy with it, and if they say yes, then from a design perspective you're okay. But from a more broader research perspective, this would also invite a new study looking at knowledge exchange and sharing, how it's actually done. So this particular study illustrates the interdependence and complementarity of different elements of a complex design, also condensed into these design propositions or design principles. It also illustrates that these design principles can meet the dual requirement of informing the design of a practical, tailor-made solution for a particular cluster of IT firms in the south of France, and responding to a general class of problems, in this particular case fostering knowledge creation in a large cluster of actors with a broad scope of technologies. And I think this study also shows that going back to the initial challenge of combining social science, behavioral science research with more engineering-inspired design research, it also shows that you can combine a more explanatory tradition in the social sciences, which focuses heavily on induction and deduction, with the more abductive and experimental work that inevitably is invoked once you do design-oriented research. I think those are the two examples I wanted to shortly talk about in terms of how to illustrate some of the issues that I framed, particularly in this more generic picture in the beginning. I think I'm doing quite well on time. Questions?